We have seen the other option, how to read the data from the flat file and then load the data into a relational table. And now we'll again see one more option, how to read the data from source table and then populate the data into target. How to populate the data into target. Now, to do this, we have a hands-on lab. To do that, we have a hands-on lab, that is your lab number 7. And when we are actually going through, if you want to understand about completely what are the steps that we are doing, you can also keep the lab open in your local machine and then go one by one step to understand it. Now, since I'm already comfortable with all these labs, so I might not be opening the lab documents when we are explaining, when I'm explaining the scenarios or whatever, I'll be directly going on, but I'll just tell you before starting the class which lab we are working on. Now we are working on the lab number 7, that is a strike load, which means this lab actually tells you the scenario where without any transformation you can extract the data from source and then populate into the target. Now here in this case I'm going to use the invoice table as a source. I'm clearing it all, an invoice table as a source which is available in the SDBU schema. So import from database and then you have the source, that is your SDBU, and then the SDBU tables. So which you have the source table is an invoice and then click on OK. And the target table is going to be the ODS underscore invoice, which is having the same structure as a source, table. So the target is available in your individual schema. Now for me, my target schema is user 5, so I'm logging in there to import the data. So tables, and then you have the target table called as a ODS underscore invoice, which is available in your target schema. I hope you guys have already run the scripts to see all these tables. Okay, so ODS invoice. Now we have the source table and the target table both are ready, and the next thing is to create the mapping. In this case, I'm creating a mapping without any transformation. I'm not using any new transformation as such. I'm just creating a simple mapping which will extract the data from source and then load it onto the target. So to create it, now I'm creating a new mapping. So new mapping name, go to the mapping tab, click on create, and here you'll use it as m underscore ODS underscore invoice, So click on OK. Now the source tab, sources, what do you have? In the source you have the source name is invoice. So drag and drop that into workspace, and you have a source qualifier query and everything by default which gets added. And the next thing is about the target. So the target is ODS underscore invoice, which will load the data from source to the target. So here I'm not using any transformations. It's just I'm reading the data from invoice table. You have the same number of columns exactly in the same order. So that's why I'm connecting each and everything. So save it. So save it. Now this is the end of your mapping. So I'm not used any transformation, and then I'm just loading the data from this to this. So is that your question, Priyan?
Yes.
Okay. So now we have created this. So to load the data into ODS underscore invoice table, I'm going to generate the session, and I'm currently already logged in into the workflow manager. So I hope now you have a comfortable, now you guys are comfortable to log into designer, log into the workflow manager, log into the workflow monitor to make use of them and how to access them and all. So now that's we have done with the first 3 steps. So our hands-on lab, whenever we are doing it, so the first step is to import the source by using a source analyzer. We have done that. Target designer, we have done that. We have created a mapping. And then the 4th step is to create the session using a task developer. So when you go, task developer. So in this, we are going to create a task developer by associating with that mapping. Click on create session, s underscore m underscore ODS underscore invoice, s underscore MODS invoice and click on create. Oops. I'm actually, one second, let me just change my working folder. It is actually trying to look the mappings in the user1 folder because the user1 folder is active here. I have to log in back to my repository folder because this is my working folder. And I have to create the session from here, and from task developer I'm creating a session. So click on task create. So the first one is S underscore M underscore ODS invoice. This is your mapping, and I'm trying to create the session, and I have to associate with this mapping, that is M underscore ODS invoice. So click on OK and then done. Now you have to provide the connections for the integration service. So edit it. So this session, what does it do? So always add the proper comments. Session extracts the data from invoice table in the SDBU schema and load into target, that is ODS underscore invoice. So click on OK, and then you have to provide the connections. Where you are going to provide the connection, go to the mapping tab, click on connections. Here you are going to provide the connections. So the first thing is going to be, my connection is going to be the source. This is a source, right? Yeah, this is a source connection. My source is available for everyone. This is source is same, that I'm going to use OLTP underscore STPU. And for a target, you're going to use, my connection is OLAP underscore user 5. So I'm using OLAP underscore user 5. Now I have given the connections, and check the source properties. This is a relational reader. That means you're reading the data from relational table. And go to the targets, check here. You have a relational writer. That means you're loading the data into relational table. And if you see that your target table is having a primary key on the, composite primary key on the invoice number and the representative number. So it has to use a normal mode because you have indexes and you can't proceed with a bulk mode. So I have to go with a normal mode. And there is one more option here in the new thing that we are going to see. All the time we are going to load the data into the BAT file directory. That is common. I'm just changing that. And there is one option here called as a truncate target table option. So what is the use of this is that whenever you want to truncate the data, whenever you want to truncate the table before loading the data, every time you run the session, I want to truncate the table and then load the data. I don't want to duplicate the data. So this is like something like a staging table. You are actually loading the data from source into the staging table, and I just want to truncate that every time I load the data into this. So if you select this option, what does it will do is, integration service, before it starts loading the data into the target table, it will fire a truncate statement to the target. It will fire a truncate statement on the target table, which will truncate the data on the target, that is your ODS underscore invoice, and then it will start loading the data. So every time the table will be truncated before loading the data into the target. Now you have provided the connections and everything. Now I'm going to create the workflow to load the data into this. Create the workflow to load the data. Now I am in the workflow designer. So click on workflow, create. So what is that? So the workflow name is WF underscore ODS underscore invoice. So assign the integration service when you're using, and then click on OK. Now the start task is being added. So I just have to drag and drop my session, whatever which I have to connect it, and then connect it with a link task. Once you connect it, that completes your app. And make sure that you are checking this option, fail the parent if the task fail. What does that mean? If at all, if the session fails because of any error, it will fail the workflow also. If you're not checking this option, what will happen is that session is in the failed status, but workflow will be in the succeeded status, which should not be the case. So now I have completed my mapping, and then save all the workflow. Save the workflow. Now the workflow is valid and the session is valid. And if you go and check, I do not have the data. So all the time here we are actually checking the data by using the mapping designer tab, but in the real time this is not the scenario. You are going to use a SQL developer or a Toad to do that. Toad to do that, to verify, and then to do the unit testing, whatever we talked about. To do all the things, you have to use SQL queries to validate that. So we can't execute SQL queries from Informatica. I'm just validating, I'm just checking the data whether it is loading the data or not. But as a developer, as an Informatica developer, you should be able to write the queries to test it, and you should also get a good understanding on how to write the unit test cases and all those things. So unit test cases, how to write it and how to verify the results, all those things you have to validate it. Okay. Now there is no data in my target table. I'm just running the workflow now, which should load the data into the target. So now you have this is the workflow which we are running, and if you see that it has loaded the data. So it is a simple lab where we do not have any kind of logic which is left, and source success rows is 20 and target success rows is 200. I mean, sorry, both are 200. So source failed rows are 0 and target failed rows are 0, and you can also verify the source target statistics 200 with 200, and you can verify the session log, what query has been used to query the data, and how the DTM has been initialized and all those things. Yeah, Pramit, if you don't mind, you can just mute yourself. I think there is an echo coming up somewhere. So you can also verify the source query, what is being used, and what is a target statements and all those things. If you see, this is a source query which is being fired by your Informatica. Select invoice number, representative number, customer number, and then it has extracted the data and then loaded it into the target. Loaded this into the target. So that is how you will load the data by using a simple mapping. That is the lab number. That is the lab number 7, which loads the data into ODS underscore invoice table, and you can also verify the data from here, whether you have any null values for any existing columns or whether it is properly loading the data or not. That everything can be validated from here by previewing the data. You can also preview the source data from here. If you just want to do that, you can also preview the source data as well. So how to do that? Just the same way, preview the data, and you can also verify the source data. So, but source, we are going to use a OLTP as the source. Now here, if you see, SDBU is my source ID and SDBU is my password. So if you just want to validate the data between source and target, probably you can do that. But my suggestion is that just always use the SQL developer to validate the data between the source and target whenever it is relational tables and all those. Now we have done with the lab number 7, how to do the strike load. We will start with this mapping in that lab little later, and now I'm going into the lab number 10, which will talk about the router transformation. What is the router transformation and how we are going to use the router. So let's understand the router transformation. So why I'm actually taking this lab now is that it is more or less like a similar like your filter transformation. No, I can't hear you, Sayos. Just go ahead if you have any question quickly. Unfortunately, I can't hear you, and probably there is some problem with your microphone or something, and I'm not sure. Okay, so check it out or ping me. I'll try and answer your query. So the next thing is about the router transformation. So the router transformation will divide the data from the input into the multiple groups. If you see about the filter transformation, what we have seen in the last class, filter transformation will allow the records only when it has only when it is satisfies the condition. If the condition is not satisfied, then it doesn't allow the records. But the router transformation is different. So it will allow the records even if the condition is not met. Also, you can also get the queries. I mean, router transformation is used to divide the data. So it will allow the, it will give you the records which are satisfying the condition. It will also give you the records which are not satisfying the condition. Both the things will be.
Karthik, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, actually I have one question in our previous mapping which we did.
Yeah, go ahead.
We selected the truncate option, right, before starting the transformation.
Yeah.
So once we start the transformation, so first it will fire the delete query, right, from the table.
Truncate query, yeah, that is a truncate query, yes. Before starting the session, before starting the loading process.
Yes. So before starting the loading process, it will delete the existing data, right? Yes. And after that, in the loading, if something happens and it got failed, the transformation got failed, then the data will be loaded back.
Yeah, I think your last thing I couldn't understand. Data will be loaded back means what do you mean?
No, first it will delete the existing data and then it will start our transformation to load the data.
Yes. Yes.
So after deleting it, our transformation failed for some reason.
Okay.
So will that deleted data will come back or?
No. That's out of scope. Once you actually truncate the data, truncate is something, it's a DDL statement in Oracle, it will not work. So once, suppose let's say your transformation has failed after loading 100 records, and while processing the 101 record, it has errored out for some reason. You'll have only 100 records. So whatever the data that is being deleted before, it will not be there. It is a physical truncate statement or a physical delete statement will be fired to the target. So once you have a delete, an Informatica doesn't have a control on that data. It's gone.
Oh. Okay, Karthik.
Yeah. So a truncate is something that which cannot be rolled back, even on the database level. Just to give you a heads up on that. That's it. Okay. Now we have seen the condition yesterday. The filter condition. Whenever a record satisfies the condition is equal to true, then it will pass the rows to the next transformation, but it doesn't give you the records which are not satisfying the condition. But the router is different. Router will give you the two options: records which are satisfying the condition, records which are not satisfying the condition. Both the options it will give you. Suppose let's say it will give you the default group, false condition, that will give you a default group. Default means the which it is not satisfying the condition will be written onto the default group, and you can also take the default group as into another target table. Suppose let's say you have a requirement. Now I have a table called as a ODS_employee table. ODS_employee table, and in that ODS_employee table I have the data for all the departments. I have employees who belongs to sales department, and I have employees who belongs to finance, admin, and then the managerial department, and I have employees who belongs to some other department also. But now my requirement is that I have a real-time scenario. Let's take a real-time scenario. Okay, so where I have to populate the sales employees into one target, and the employees who belongs to finance, admin, and the managerial into one target, and the employees who are having experience, less than 2-year-old, I want to populate into another target. So how are you going to do that? So if it is a filter, then what you have to do, you have to make multiple filter conditions to, multiple filter transformations to achieve this logic. Now I'm going to do that by using a router transformation. Router transformation will give you a luxury of dividing a data into multiple groups, and whereas a router is also an active transformation. Why it is called as an active transformation? And it will also give you a default group, and when you are using it, it will also give you a default group along with this, and default group which is not satisfying the condition. So now I'm going to divide the data between the multiple targets. So in this example, we are going to see how to read the data from a single table and then load the data into the multiple tables. So we have a table called as a ODS underscore employee, which is ODS underscore employee, which is present in the your target schema, that is your user file schema or whatever the schema that you have created, individual schema. There is a table which is already there. And if you remember, we have loaded the ODS underscore employee table in our first lab by concatenating the first name and last name, and then loaded the data into ODS underscore employee table. So to do that, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the ODS underscore employee as a source, which is available in the user 5 schema in my case, and the target tables which we have, that is called as a ODS underscore employee sales, ODS underscore employee non-sales, and all those things, that which is available in the user 5 schema. Both source table and the targets table both are existing in the same schema. So let's look at the data mapping sheet. From now on, we might not be checking more things on the data mapping sheet side. So you can just go through that, however that we are going to proceed with the data mapping sheet. Okay, let me just open the data mapping sheet and understand how we are going to transform the data by using a router transformation. So router transformation. Here, if you see, there is something called as a M underscore ODS underscore employee types, and M underscore ODS underscore employee types. If you see, the source table is common for all the things, but you have a multiple target tables called as ODS underscore employee sales, ODS underscore employee non-sales, ODS underscore employee rookie, and you are dividing the data based upon the column. There is a column called as a type code, which will tell you that employee belongs to the sales department or finance department or admin department. It will tell you. So based upon the type code column, I'm going to divide the data among the columns. And also I have one more table called as a ODS underscore employee rookie. This table, I want to store the employees who are having experience less than 2 years. So how am I going to find out the experience of the employee based upon the source column? Here I have a column called as a date hired, which means when the employee has actually joined the organization. And using this column, I'm going to find out the experience of the employee. I'm going to find out the experience of the employee by comparing the date hired column with the today's date. And based on that, I'll calculate the experience. And if an employee is having an experience less than 2-year-old, then I'm going to populate the data into this rookie. Else, I'm not going to do that. So this is how I want to divide the data between the tables. So let me just take ODS underscore employee as a source table and then start with a hands-on lab. So the first step, we are working on the lab number 10 now. So router transformation. So to import the source database, my source is available in the target user 5 schema, not on the SDBU schema, because that is a ODS underscore employee. So that is the user 5 schema. So just enter the whatever the details, that is your target schema details, and then import the target table, that is your ODS underscore employee, ODS underscore employee. So when you click on that ODS underscore employee, this is your source table, which was a target table for your earlier mapping. Once you load the data into this ODS underscore employee table, then only you'll be able to proceed with the hands-on lab. If the data is not there and you're trying to directly do the 10th lab, then you cannot, it will not work out. So make sure that you're completing the first labs and then try and do that. Now we have a data here, that is all the records are available. And the target, in the target side, I'm clearing this, right click on it, clear. On the target side, I just want to import the 3 tables at a time. So what are all the 3 target tables that you have? So target tables that you have is ODS underscore employee sales, non-sales, and the rookies. So if you want to import multiple tables, hold your shift button and then select all the tables and then click on OK. Click on OK. Now you have the source table which is ready and the target tables which are ready. So if you see that all these target tables are having a primary key, so we can't proceed with a bulk mode to do that, and whereas a normal mode is a essential in this case. So I'm going to, my sources are ready and my targets are ready. Next thing is to create the mapping. So now to create the new mapping, I'm in the mapping designer tab, go to the mappings, click on create, and M underscore, I'm naming this mapping as M underscore ODS underscore employee types, ODS underscore employee types. So click on create, and your source is ODS underscore employee, which is being already imported here as OLAP user file. Drag and drop that into workspace. Now you have a source, arrange it properly. And the next thing is to create the router transformation. Router transformation will divide the data between the multiple groups. Divide the data between the multiple groups. So to do that, go to the transformation tab, click on create, select the router, and here the router transformation name always starts with RTR underscore. RTR underscore. RTR underscore. Now you can just name it as ODS underscore employee types. So you have to divide that, add a router transformation. And once you add a router transformation, now you have to divide the data just like your filter transformation. So whatever the columns that you are required, so drag and drop all the columns. I require all these columns to be populated into the target. So I'm dragging and dropping all the columns into this. Now I'm going to create the filter condition. So how am I going to create? So now if you see here, this is not allowing you to take it as an output. I have to add a condition here. So just double click on this. In the transformation level, you can add a description here. This transformation, so whatever, this transformation divides the data between the multiple targets, or whatever, you can write it. And go to the ports tab. Suppose if you want to add anything, delete anything, you can just use it. And the properties tab, this is a tracing level, that is a logging level, which if you have to increase the logging level, you can use this option. So the next important option in the router transformation is a group. So here, if you want to divide the data among the groups, here you have to add a group name and then the group filter condition. In order to add a group name, there is a option here, add a new group to this router. So just click on this, add a new group to this router. Now the first thing is about the sales. So how are you going to understand the sales side? Whenever a type code is equal to sales, that is your sales employees. So to create the new group, I'm naming the group name as sales. Means whoever satisfies whichever record that satisfies this condition, it will be assigned onto this. So always the group filter condition should be true or false. Now I'm going to create a filter condition by using a type code column. So whenever a type code column is equal to sales, this you're going to assign it to the sales group. So validate the expression and click on OK. Now if you see, when I have added a sales group, automatically there is a default group which is being added. So see here, path of the data when none of the group conditions are satisfied. That means if a record is not satisfying this condition, automatically it will assign to this group. This option you do not have it in the filter, whereas a default block is not there. You have to create one more filter to get all the values which is not equal to sales, but the router will give you an option. If the condition is not satisfied, then it will assign on to else block. It is like a default block. Just apply the condition and then now see here. If you look at this, there are output groups which are being added to this. One is a sales group, another is a default group. And if you want to populate this, from here you can populate into the target as well. So, but if you see, you cannot pass the input to these output groups. So it is taking an input and dividing the data into multiple output groups. So now I have some more conditions, not only the sales. I also want to populate, also want to add one more group called as a non-sales. So who are all of the employees are actually called as a non-sales department. Whoever belongs to finance, whoever belongs to admin, whoever belongs to manager, they will use this thing. So it can be, this condition can be returned by using two ways, but you can just understand the other condition, how to use a in operator, in Informatica. So in operator just like works like a in operator in a SQL. So it will just validate the multiple values. Suppose it will give you true if the value falls onto the whatever the values that you have given. So if I am using type code of finance or admin or manager, if I am using something like this, if type code is equal to finance or type code is equal to admin or type code is equal to manager, then it will give you true, else it will return false. It will just match the list of values which are available here. If it is matching the condition, then it will give the value, otherwise it will give you the nothing. It will give you the false. So whenever type code is finance, admin or manager, then we are going to use a non-sales. And then the other one is going to be the rookies. So when we are going to consider these employees as a rookies, and here we have to understand there is a function called as a date difference. There is a function called as a date difference, which will give you the difference in terms of months, difference in terms of years, difference in terms of, it takes a 3 arguments. One is a date 1, date 2, date 1 is being the highest, and it will take the format. If you are giving it in mm, it will give you a difference in terms of months. It will give you a difference in terms of months. If you are using your YY, it will give you a difference in terms of years. If you are using DD, it will give you a day difference in terms of days. So use YY, which it will give you a years. And if you are using DD, it will give you a difference in terms of days. So here date 1 is a highest date and date 2 is a lowest date, date 1 and date 2. So in order to use this thing here, I'm going to use a date difference function to do that. Now go here, I'm going to use a date difference function. Go to all functions. You have something called as a date difference. This is a function. It takes a date 1 and date 2 on the format. If you just want to understand the help document, you can just slip into the help document and then refer the multiple examples. So I'm going to compare by using a system date. How can I get the system date here? You can go to the variables tab. All the built-in variables will be available here. Built-in variables which you have to use it. Now I want to use a system date. So just use a system date, and then you have something called as a hire date. What is a hire date? Hire date is a date hired port, and I want to get the day difference in terms of years, so I'm using YY. So whenever it is less than or equal to 2 years, then I want to call them as a rookies, So whenever this condition is evaluated to true, now this is this. So here you're having a sales, non-sales and the rookies. Now the question is why the router transformation is called as an active transformation. Why does that so? It is giving all the rows to the target. Why is it called as an active transformation? Because is there a change of number of rows when you pass the input to the router? Okay, so let's understand whether we have a change of number of rows or not. So how the router evaluation will be done? First, it will check this row whether a type code is equal to sales or not. If the type code is equal to sales, it will assign that into this. If this is not true, then it will go and check this. If this is also not true, then it will go and check this. If this is also not true, then it will go and assign the value to the default group. But there is a possibility that one record might be qualified for 2 groups. Suppose let's say this is a condition, whereas a type code is equal to sales, and this employee, whoever belongs to the sales, might be less than 2-year-old in a company. Yes, there is a possibility. So here you have an increase in the number of rows. The number of rows that you are passing to the router, when you are actually retrieving it, there is a change in the number of rows, because if you are giving 2 rows, it is giving you a 4 rows as an output, because there is a change in the number of rows. That's why the router transformation is called as an active transformation, because it is changing the number of rows. So likewise, you have divided the multiple groups of data and then divide that. Now, if you see here, you have the data that is being added. So sales, non-sales, rookies, and then the default group. Now I have 3 target tables which I have to populate: sales, non-sales, and then the rookies. So first thing is about the ODS employee sales. Drag and drop that into target. So employee ID 1, date hired, and the type code, everything is the same. So just connect it to the target. And you have the other thing called as ODS underscore employee non-sales. Drag and drop that into target and then assign it here into this ODS underscore employee non-sales. And you have the other one called as ODS underscore employee rookies. So just drag and drop that and then connect that with the rookies. Here I'm not using a default group. That means I'm not populating the default group. I'm just leaving it. Your Informatica will just ignore it if you're not connecting it to the target. I'm not using it. I'll be using that in the different lab. Now in this lab, what we have done, we have extracted the data and we have divided the data based upon the type code and all these things, and then loaded the data into 3 target tables, that is your sales, non-sales, and the employee. So that is your lab number 10, which you have to extract the data. So if you go and see, these tables will not contain any of the data because we have not loaded the data yet into these tables. So if you try and use, no, now this part, preview data, so user file, nothing. So here also you do not have anything. User file, you do not have any data. So now we have this option. So now we have seen, we have done with the mapping. So I would like to hear if you have any questions on this. So yeah, yes.
Karthik, here we have three groups, right? Sales and non-sales and rookie, and we have a default.
Yes.
If first record is non-sales, will it go to the default or will it go to the non-sales?
That's what I said. I mean, when you're actually, when the router is actually validating it, first it will check this condition. If that is not true, then it will go and check this condition. If that is also not true, then it will go and check this. If all of them are not true, then it will go to the default. See here, path for a data when none of the group conditions are satisfied. That means if none of these are not satisfied, then it will go to this. Otherwise, it will not go to default.
It will just check in this order which we mentioned: sales,
yes.
non-sales, and
yes. It won't go to the default. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, you don't have a case where it's it belongs to both, like sales and rookie, or non-sales and rookie.
Okay. Yes. So if you have such kind of a scenario, then probably you have to write a multiple conditions here. So let's say I have to populate both the sales and rookies into the same. It actually the ambiguous part when you talk about, but when you have a multiple conditions of that kind, then you can also do that. I mean, you can just by adding a or condition or and condition, whatever you want, you can do that. I mean, that's up to you. I mean, based upon your requirement, however you want, you can modify the filter conditions. But as per the hands-on lab, we just have to understand, I mean, it's being designed, the hands-on lab is designed to understand all the possibilities of the router. That's why we have used this. And if you have any that kind of a requirement, you can also do that. And you can also try that whatever you want. Yes.
And Karthik, if that record satisfies both sales and rookie group, that record will be placed in both the tables, right?
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah. Yes. Any other questions? Yeah, Naresh.
It doesn't satisfy any of the table, conditions. It goes into default one. So, but we didn't define anything for default one, right? So
yeah, I mean, yes. If you're since you're not defined anything, Informatica will just ignore it because you don't have a target which is connected to that, and that means you're not interested in default group. That's it. If you're interested in actually in the default group, then you can populate this into another group, whatever you want.
Okay.
Yeah, here in this case, I am not connected to anything. Your Informatica cannot find the target where it has to populate. It will just ignore those records.
Okay. So the purpose of router is to differentiate the data into 3 different tables, right?
This kind of, I mean, whenever you have a requirement where like I have to divide the data between the multiple groups of, multiple targets. I have to divide the data in the multiple targets, then you can go for a router transformation. Or this can also be achieved. This can also be achieved by using a multiple filter transformations. One for a sales, one for a non-sales, one for a rookies. Likewise, you can do it. But the router is always an advantageous option. Router is always an advantageous option because it takes a less amount of memory rather than rather than your multiple filter transformation. So that's why router is plays a advantageous compared to multiple filters. Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay.
And Karthik, I have one more question. If the record satisfies both the groups, is there any way I have to load into only one table? Like first it loaded into sales table means I don't want to load it in the rookie table.
Yes, you have to be, you have to actually create a negation condition. That is now let's say here you have to write and type code is not equal to sales. That is only the way that you can do that.
Okay.
So that's what I am excluding the records which are loaded into the sales. You have to write the condition. That's on your end.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm proceeding with the workflow workflow in the workflow manager, and now I'm creating a session. So here I'm going to show you the new thing, and so far we have created sessions by using a task developer, right? And whenever you are creating sessions by using a task developer, all are appearing in this. And there is also one more scenario. You can also create the session directly by using a workflow designer. You can also directly create the sessions by using a workflow designer. What is the difference if you create a session from the task developer and if you create the session from the workflow designer, right? So now I'm creating a workflow first before creating the session this time. So WF underscore ODS underscore employee types. ODS underscore employee types. Now the session, this is being added. Now I don't have a session which I have created for M underscore ODS employee types. I have to create a session. This time I'm defining in the workflow designer, not in the task developer. Okay. I'm going into the task, click on create and select the session from here, and I'm entering the session name. My session name is S underscore M underscore ODS underscore employee types. ODS underscore employee types. And click on create. Now I have to associate with M underscore ODS employee types and click on OK. Done. So here I have a session which is being added. Observe here, when I've created a session, whatever the session that I've created here, S underscore M ODS employee types, is not appearing here in this window. Is not appearing. So let's observe the difference. So I have to connect this session to task. If you are creating a session directly in the workflow designer, if you are creating a session in the workflow designer, which means that session is a non-reusable session. Means this session is like a private session which can be used only with this workflow. It cannot be used. When you are creating a sessions here in the task developer, that is a public. That means I can use it in any workflow. If I have to use this in another workflow, I can use it. So we have an option of connecting, reusing the session in the multiple workflows if you are creating in the task developer. If you are creating in the workflow designer, which means that works only in that workflow. It cannot be used in some other workflow. That is the use. That is a reusable, non-reusability. So whatever the thing that you actually define, that, okay, I don't have this clearing. Okay, let me just clear one by one. So I'm clearing from the delete from the workflow or worklet. So that is the reusability and non-reusability between the, if you have to, I have a session which I want to use it in the multiple workflows, then you can create that using a task developer. That is a reusable session. And if you're creating a session using a workflow designer, that is a private and it can be used only with this workflow. Let me just assign the connections. Fail the parent if the task fails, and now you can add your description, whatever you want. And here Now I have this SQ underscore employee. This is a relational reader. I can assign the connection from here also. So where is my source is present? That is OLAP underscore user 5. So just select that, and then the target table is having target table is also available in the same schema. So I'm going to use OLAP underscore user 5, and all your target tables are having, all your target tables are having primary keys. So I have to go with a normal mode instead of doing the bulk mode. So here I have to load the data into ODS underscore OLAP underscore user 5, and here the rookies which you have, and OLAP underscore user 5. You have to select the normal mode. Why I'm selecting the normal mode? Because I have the indexes and I can't proceed with this. So this lab we are going to redo it. That's why I'm selecting this option, truncate. Okay, we can select that later stage. So now we have assigned the connections now, and let's try and load the data into the target. So save it. Now you have the assign the connections. Let me just cross check once whether all the connections are available or not. Yes, all the connections are available. Your source and target tables, everything is available in the target. Everything is available in the user 5 schema. So that's why I'm just using it. And then start the workflow. Now it will extract the data from all these and then load it. Still, after saving out also, I don't have that session S underscore M ODS employee types, which is appearing in this session, So start the workflow. And now you can go to workflow monitor and then verify whether it is succeeded or not. Yes, it is completed. So you can just verify what is the source query is being fired and how many rows. See here, out of out of 26 rows, only 22 rows have been populated into the target, and other 4 rows have gone to the default group. So you have not connected the default group, so it is not being populated. 26 group. And if you see the source target statistics, 14 rows are populated into the sales table, and 8 rows are populated into the non-sales table, and you don't have any employee who is having a less than 2-year-old experience. Who is less than 2-year-old in an organization. So that's why you have the records as 0. Another 4 records, where it has gone? It has gone to the default group. So you're not connecting it. So that's why it doesn't show those records into the target. Only 22 records. If you go and verify ODS underscore employee rookie, obviously you'll not find any data in that because it has not loaded any of the record. And if you see the sales table would have the data only the employees who belongs to the sales department. So see here, type code is equal to sales. All the employees are having a sales. And if you go and see the non-sales, whatever the 8 records that we have, that will have the data for non-sales who belongs to finance, admin, and the manager department that they have. And if you go and see the data in the another data in this employee and rookie, so if you go and preview the data, so that you can just user 5 and then see you do not have this thing also here, right? So OLAP underscore user 5, which is not even available. So likewise, you have the option of loading the data into multiple groups by using a router transformation. So that completes your lab number 10. And how you load the data into the target tables using the router transformation, right? So any questions before proceeding with the next lab?
Karthik, if at all we want to view this session afterwards, where can we see this?
Yeah, it will be there in the workflow monitor. Suppose, let's say your workflow run has been completed, and you've logged into the, let's say you have logged into the designer, and if you want to see the session logs will be available on the server. Suppose if you just want to see the runs, workflow runs, how many times it has run actually, and all those things, you have to verify it. You can verify it from the workflow monitor. Suppose, let's say you want to see the workflow log, what is being generated, or the session log, what is being generated, that you can verify it from the server folder. So if you go to the server folder, here inside this there will be a, so this is my server folder where I have in my Linux machine, home Oracle Informatica 9.0 1.0 server info shared. This is where all the server related files will be available. If you want to see the session logs, all the session logs are appearing here. And similarly, if you want to see the workflow logs, you can also see the workflow logs from here. But there will be a limit. I mean, when you are actually, suppose if your workflow is running for a day in and day out on a daily basis, and your your server cannot store all the logs, it is a waste of memory. And you can also limit the number of session logs that can be, I mean, number of session logs that can be possible or defined for a particular session. So you can define, let's say, only last 2 run session logs I want to store it. It is like a LIFO, last in first out. I mean, first in first out. FIFO mechanism will be followed. So suppose, let's say you're running the same workflow 2 times in a day and 2 session logs will be created. Tomorrow you're running workflow 1 more time. The session log which is created for the first time is gone to save it. All these kind of configuration logic also can be defined in the session. How many number of session logs you want to store it, and how many number of workflow logs you want to store it, and all those things. So if you want to store these log options, there is in the configuration tab, on the session level configuration tab, you can just save it. So if you see that, save the session log for these runs. If it is 0 means, suppose if you are running a workflow for 0 means infinity. How many number of times you run it, it will save that many number of times. If you are actually saving it as 2, that means it will save last 2 runs only. If you are saving it as 10, last 10 runs. It can be also stored by using a timestamp. Based on the timestamp you want to store it, and how long you want to keep it, this file. Maybe 2 days, 3 days, maximum time period. In number of hours you can specify. So that also you can specify. These are all the configuration things which will be done by the administrator itself. I mean, these properties will be defined by your administrator and which will be applicable for all the sessions that you create. We'll see this in the later classes, how to define these properties and who will be defining this, and how to define the common properties across all the sessions. Because it is not possible for a developer, every time you create the session, you go and modify all these attributes. So you can define for one session and the same properties will be applied to all the sessions. There is a tab called as a default session configuration. Okay. So if you specify the properties here in the default session configuration, whatever the session that you create, it will automatically apply all these properties what you define here. So you can define all these things. So you can view them in the monitor. At the same time, you can also view them in your session log folder and the workflow log folder. And one pain part here is that this is a binary format. And you can't read that. You can't read the binary format. And your log service, whatever is there, right? So you have a log service which will help you to convert. Now, when I'm actually going to my ODS time or ODS underscore employee types and then triggering on this get session log, what Informatica is doing? Informatica is actually converting a binary log file into a readable format and then showing it to me. And if you have to access directly the workflow log here, it is in the binary format. You can't read it. So whenever you want to view the log, then you can view the logs from the monitor itself. Suppose, let's say, if you want to get the previous runs, then you can right click on it. There is an option called as a get previous runs. If you click on this, it will give you the, suppose if the workflow has run for, you want to see the last week 10 runs, how many times it has run. So if you click on this get previous runs, it will give you how many times that workflow has run and what date, what time, timestamp, and everything will be given to you on the workflow itself. So you can always view the workflow details and the session details from the workflow monitor if you just want to see the statistics and all those things, right?
Karthik?
Yeah. One at a time, yeah. Go ahead.
Can I copy that log file from my source, from my server directory to my desktop, maybe in the future? So can I open that file from my workflow monitor?
Yeah, that's what.
Binary format.
Yo, you want to? I mean, there is no meaning if you save this binary file, and it should. You have to actually suppose. Let's say I'm copying this file now. If you open this file, you can't read it. This is a
Can I open this binary format file through my workflow monitor by any chance?
No, you don't have that. I mean, that it is not something like a PDF document or something. That is a service I'm talking about. That is a log service. You can't open it. And there is only one way that you can do it. You can keep the backup of all the logs and then write them again back to your log folder. Now I'm dragging and dropping again back to this log folder. And if you just want to fetch all the runs, I mean, I'm just overwriting that. That's why. And then you can try and open it. I mean, you don't have any that kind of a future like where by using open a log file, that kind of UI which Informatica is actually providing it to you to open the binary file. It doesn't allow you.
Okay.
Any other questions? Or somebody was talking something? Yeah, go ahead with your questions, please. Okay then. So we are going ahead with the next lab. That is, this is indeed a simple lab that we are going to do it. If you see, I have, you know, we have 20 minutes time. Okay. So now your 16th lab, I'm talking about your 16th lab, the populating of the data into the heterogeneous targets. So if you see this, now I'm not populating this default group into any of the target. Now my requirement is that I just want to populate this default data into a file, some dummy file or a default file where all the defaulted records I just want to write into the default directory. So I just want to populate this data into a default flat file. I want to write them into a flat file. So to write the data, I don't have a target file structure to import it. So if you have a target file structure, which you can use, you can go to the target designer tab and then go to the targets, import from file. But I don't have a target definition of the file. Instead of importing the target definition from the file, I just want to create it manually. How to do that? Go to the targets, click on create. Here you can define, suppose if you want to define the target table, if you want to define the flat file, anything you can do that. So now here I want to create a target table called as a employee flat file underscore default. So this is my employee flat file underscore default is my target name, and select the database type. This is a flat file, right? So just select it and then click on create. Done. So here you can start the columns, whatever the columns that you want to define on the target table. So, and the delimiter. So the delimiter, I just want to go with tab. So just add a tab delimiter and then assign this. So this is a delimited file which I want to assign. And if you want to add a columns, you can also add the columns one by one and then select the data type and everything. And just to save your time, in case if you also want to copy the columns from the other, so I have to define the target flat file in the same structure, I mean in the same format. So there is an option called as copy columns and move columns. Okay, if you want to copy the columns from one to this, then I want to copy the column list same as this. So just copy and then do it here. It will automatically copy it. So now here I just want to modify something. There is no meaning of keeping a primary key on the target table, I mean target flat file. So that's why I'm selecting this, and I have selected all the columns. And here the same properties. Suppose if you want to display the date time format in this format, then you can select MMDD, YYY, whatever. But I want to display my date in the different format. So it is something like this, DD MON-YYY format. So whenever Informatica is writing the data into the target file, it will write the date in this format. So all those things I have applied. Now I have defined the target flat file. This is a flat file. If you edit it, a definition itself shows that this is a flat file. Now, what I'm trying to do here is that whatever the default data that we have not used, right? Whatever the default data that we have not used, I want to populate that into my default flat file. So instead of, let me just arrange it all in iconic fashion and open the workflow router. This is a router, and I want to populate this into a default flat file. So what is your file? This is your file, and then write them into a target. So employee ID 2 will go to the employee ID, and you have a name which will be populated into the name column, and you have a date height and the type code which you are populating. So now in this scenario, in this hands-on lab, we are going to understand how a target file can be defined and how to understand, what are the things that you have to understand whenever you are writing a data into the target file, whenever you are writing a data into the file, whenever you are writing a data into the file as a target. So now I'm saving it. What I've done, the steps, oh sorry, I would have actually done it in the different lab. Okay, so I'm just deleting this. Okay, what I'm doing is, instead of actually disturbing this hands-on lab, this mapping, I want to duplicate this mapping. How can I do that? Go to the mapping tab, copy as, and I can just duplicate the mapping. This is you're populating into a flat file. So I've just duplicated. Now, if you see, I have two mappings here. One is ODS underscore employee types, another is ODS underscore employee types flat file. Both are there. So I have duplicated the mapping, and I don't want to disturb the mapping which we have created before. That's why I've created a new mapping, and now the same mapping which is available, I just have to populate the data into target flat file. So arrange all iconic, and I'll just assign the target flat file data, default data, into my target. So my target is this one. So let me just connect and then connect all these attributes. So we are trying to load the data again into the same tables by loading the default data into the employee FF default flat file. So just save it, whatever the data that you have. Now this will tell you the scenario populating of data into the heterogeneous targets. One target is a relational table, another target is a flat file. So how to achieve this populating of the data into the heterogeneous targets? So when you see that arrange all iconic, we have a 4, and all the default data I'm populating into the flat file. So let's try and create the session and the workflow for this. So I'm creating again the workflow by using a workflow designer, and the session also by workflow designer. WF underscore ODS underscore employee types underscore flat file. So click on create. Now I want to create a session for a newly created mapping. So create a session. Here I'm using S underscore M underscore ODS underscore employee types flat file. So click on create. Now you have M underscore ODS employee types flat file. So click on OK. This is done. Now the same way, you have total 4 targets now. Let me just connect with the 4 targets. 3 are relational tables and 1 is a flat file. So relational tables you have to provide the connection, and for a flat file you need to provide the target path where it has to populate. So let's provide the connections first one by one. So this source is available in my OLAP underscore user file, which we are reading the data from relational table. And ODS underscore employee sales is also available in the OLAP underscore user file. And I just want to get the target load time data as normal. And since the data is already there in the target table and we have a primary key, if you're trying to load the same data, it will throw the error saying that unique constraint violation. So that's why I want to truncate the target table before loading the data into that. So let's truncate the target table, select the connection as OLAP underscore user 5, and also select it as a normal mode when you're doing it. And also for rookies also you have a data, assign the connection. OLAP user 5 is my schema where I'm loading, and target load type is a normal again because you have a primary key. and load the data target, and also make sure that you are changing the bad file names, because it will try and overwrite. It will use the same name and it will try and overwrite the bad file which I have generated. So you can just always change the bad file name and then use it. And now the new thing that we are seeing here is the employee. What are the properties that we have to consider when we are actually writing the data into the target? So this merge properties, we'll see that later. And to understand, append if exist. This will give you an option. Append if exist, if you're selecting it, suppose there is a flat file with that name, with the data present in the flat file. If you want to add the new data, if you want to append that into a flat file, then you have to select this. We'll see this option, we'll come back. And create the target directory. Suppose whatever the target directory that you are providing is not existing, and you want the Informatica to create it. If it is not available, then you can select this. Generally, we do not use this option because of the new directory. And the header options, look here. So I want to generate the header in the flat file by using my output field names as per the target. If you are keeping it as a no header, Informatica will generate the file without the header. If you want to generate the header, then you can use this output field names. Or I don't want to use output field names. I want to generate by using a command, that I can use a command output and then use it as a header. Most of the times we'll use output field names as a header, and you want to generate the footer command saying like you just want to add this is the end of the file. So to make sure that the user has to understand, so I want to write something like this. This is the end of the file. I'm using an echo command. So since your server is actually in the Linux, and whatever the command that you use here, your integration service will execute these commands. Since the server is on the Linux and you have to use only the Linux commands and Unix commands. If your server is in Windows, you have to use a batch commands to do that. These are all the commands which will get executed. So that's why echo is a command to display the data. I'm just using echo, this is the end of the file. So this should append this footer when I'm writing the data. I'm generating the header by using the output field names. I'm generating the footer by using the Linux command, whatever is there. And the output type is a file, and you have output file directory. This is a $PM target file directory. Where is this target directory file will be available? Same info shared folder. And if you go here, inside this, there is a target files. So if you log into this, then only you can see. Now, let's delete all the files, whatever is there. Okay, let it be. And anyway, we are going to generate the unique file with it. So here it is going to generate $PM target file directory, and I just want to mention the file name what we are going to generate. I want to generate the file in this format, employee underscore default underscore ff.txt. I want to generate the file in this format. So that is my file name, and the bad file directory. Whenever while loading the data, if you still have errors, then write them into a bad file, rejected file in the bad file directory. Now what I have set here, I have added a footer command, and I have used a header. I want to generate the header by using my output field names as per the source, as per the target, and I am generating the file in the target file directory. So these are all the options that I have selected, and you can also override the properties. If you see the set file properties, it will be carry forward from your source. You have set the delimiter as a tab, so it will generate the tab. Suppose let's say in the target level you defined it as a tab, but here you are using it as a comma. Which one will take effect? So always the session properties will override the mapping properties. So if you see this, if you save it now, what will happen is it will generate the flat file with a comma, not with a tab anymore. Always the session properties will take a precedence over the mapping properties. Now I have modified the target properties and then run it. So when I run this workflow, it will generate the target file in my target file directory, whichever is there on my Linux machine. So now run the workflow, start the workflow. When you start it, so it will go and write the, okay, let's check whether it is running it or not, I mean whether it is completed or not. So this is a path and it is succeeded. You have, let's verify the statistics, and out of 26 rows, 26 rows are written into the target file, and now you have the default group. Rookies are not having any data, and the default flat file is having 4 records. Let's go and verify whether we have a target file here or not. So there a file is being generated in my target file. Open this and check. So this is a comma separated file, and see here this is also added. This is the end of the file, this which I have generated by using a footer. So if you want to generate the header also by using a command, then you can use that command and then write it. Instead of using output field names, you can use that. So that is how you can generate it. And there is one more option here. So every time you run the workflow, it will overwrite the data in the flat file. It will overwrite the data in the flat file. Let's say you want to append the data to the existing file. You want to append the data to the existing file, then you can just select this option, append if exist. If the file is already present, what it will do? It will just add the data to that file. Let's rerun that and then see whether it is adding a file or not. I mean whether it is adding a data or not to the flat file. So I think 653 it has loaded. Let's see now the data is being appended to the flat file. If you're not selecting that option, append if exist, it will always overwrite the data. It will always overwrite the data. So that is how you can generate the flat file. I mean, that is how you can generate the flat file as a target and then write it. So, and now the question is that, suppose let's say you have a requirement. So every time when I'm running the workflow, it is overwriting the file. I don't want to overwrite the file. I want to keep a track of all the files generated by the workflow. When I'm generating the file, I want to append the timestamp to the file. I want to append the timestamp. Today when I'm running, it has to generate the, it has to generate the file with the today's timestamp. Tomorrow when I'm running, it has to generate the file with the tomorrow's timestamp and all those things. So how to achieve that? So this is a static, file name is not changing. When I rerun this, now I have how many records are there in this? See how many records I have. I have around 10 records, and I have unchecked that append if exist option. If I rerun the workflow again, what will happen? If I rerun it, it will overwrite the file. So, but your business user is interested in keeping a track of the files, what we are generating. It has overwritten the file. So how can we generate the file dynamically using Informatica? So I hope my scenario is clear to you. So I just want to generate the file every day. When I'm generating, it's something like this: employee_f 2001-2014.txt. Tomorrow it has to generate the file with 2021-01-2014.txt, something like that. So every day it has to generate a new file. So it has to generate a new file, and tomorrow, I mean day after tomorrow, when it is generating, it has to generate a file something like this. I don't want the file to be overwritten, because data is getting overwritten and I'm losing my old data. Suppose for some reason your business user has actually not viewed that data and it has not delivered to your business user, and he wants the old file, then you don't have a old file data what is being generated. So how can we achieve this? How can we achieve this? That part you can just try it out, maybe by googling or just by understanding the logic, and then see if it is not. I mean, tomorrow we'll discuss how to generate the file dynamically by using Informatica.